Hey everyone, it's Mario Time 1000. Now, when I uploaded my last video, someone actually left a comment on it saying something along the lines of, I am missing out because I am only buying the new cars and that there's so many cool old cars that I should buy some of those. And let me just say, you are totally right. There are so many cool, really old F1 diecasts from like the 70s, 80s. Well, F1 cars, I guess I shouldn't just assume they're diecast. 70s, 80s, even the early 90s. I mean, there's cool ones from every season pretty much. And I am totally missing out not buying those. But unfortunately, I don't have an infinite supply of money. And because of that, in my mind, it's just always been a bigger value to me to buy F1 cars I've actually seen and see. So that's why I always stick to the new cars. But it reminded me that I actually do have a really old F1 diecast. It's not technically mine, which is why I haven't included it in any of the collection videos, but it is old. It competed in the first F1 season ever, and here it is. What you are looking at is the Alfa Romeo 159. Now, this car is a bit of an interesting one because it's a sort of like a B-spec chassis, almost. There's also the Alfa Romeo 158, which Wikipedia doesn't have two separate pages for. They just have one. So the 159 is basically the same as the 158. There's minor differences, but it's, for all intents and purposes, it's the same chassis. And this car won its first race in 1937. 1937. This car predates, it's older than Formula One itself. And you may remember that I mentioned that it competed in F1. That was 12 years later, and they were still running the same chassis. And in 1950, they won all of the races, except for the Indy 500, because no F1 teams actually ran that. But that was an F1 race back then, technically, so yeah, only race this car did not win in 1950. And it had some of the greatest drivers of all time running it. Among them was Juan Manuel Fangio. People talk about this guy still because he is one of the greats in F1, probably the best driver of that era. But obviously, I wasn't alive back then, so I don't really know. But as I mentioned before, this car is the 159. So this car only ran in F1 in 1951, the second season of F1, and it won 4 of the 7 races. It still dominated the season. Fangio still won the championship that year. So this is, for a time, it was the only car that won an F1 race. People still complain about Mercedes. Imagine racing in an F1 where this was the only car that had ever won. And there was actually, I don't remember what race it was. And it was actually in 1951 that this car came with a bit of controversy. In the French Grand Prix that year, they of course had Fangio running, and they also had Luigi Fagioli. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but the other way is just too funny for me. And something happened to Fangio's car. It started running badly. It was sick, if you will. And so he pulled into the pits, and they actually did a car swap. And Fagioli got out, and Fangio, wow, they have the exact same last name pretty much. Fangio got in that car and actually won the race. So the 1951 French Grand Prix, technically 2 people won that race. And the reason I mention that is because of the number. Back then, F1 numbers were a lot different. They weren't given to you by the driver like how it is now. Like, they have their own personal numbers. They weren't given to you by the constructors of the previous season because the constructors didn't even exist yet. You just got a number when you went to a race. It would not be the same every race. It was down to the organization that was running the race. They just gave you a random number. And it just so happens that the only time this Alfa Romeo car ran the number 8 was at the French Grand Prix in 1951, at least in terms of F1 races. So I am holding the first, I can't say the first controversial F1 car. I'm sure every race there was a controversy with the car. But a controversial F1 car. I've got it in my hands right now. What's awesome about that is that I actually have two. So I basically have the Fangio version and the Fagioli version. I really don't know if that's how you say his name. So yeah, that's pretty cool. We'll look at that one later. It's the exact same. Let's actually look at the car now. I've given you guys a history lesson on this car, so let's actually look at it. I have no idea when this diecast was made. It could have been made in the 50s for all I know. It does not have a whole lot of detail to it. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot on that car, and if you see a picture, it's just a red pill. So yeah, we've got the Alfa Romeo red, and of course the little Alfa Romeo Clover. We've got some grills here because this is actually a front engine car. It's been a long time since we've had a front engine car in Formula One and IndyCar. We've got the number 8 and a little bump on the back for the fuel intake. And on this side, we've got the giant exhaust port that hangs out the side. I'm sure that was super safe. The wheels, they look like wheels that the F1 and Indy cars ran at that time. They were pretty snazzy, and of course they are smaller on the front. And we've got the front grille and then the little Alfa Romeo logo, but it's not painted like everything else on this car. And there's nothing on the bottom, just some little blah blah here, and that's how I know it was the Alfa Romeo 159. Not a whole lot to this car, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot to old F1 cars back then in general, so it only makes sense that the diecast is the same way. In terms of interior detail, we've got the seat and the steering wheel, and there actually are, I might have to show a picture of it, yeah. There actually are gauges. There's a sticker that have the gauges on it, which is so awesome, because that's something we don't even see today. Well, I guess the gauges are all on the steering wheel. And also, I'll show a picture of this if I can. The inside is completely hollow. There is nothing here. There's no plastic or anything filling up this car. There is hollow. It's actually all metal. Even the seat, you can feel how cold it is. This is an all metal car, which is super awesome. I mean, it's heavier than this Charles Leclerc car I have right here. This car at the back is heavier, and I have no idea what scale it is. I don't know if it's a 1/18 scale, but you can just see how giant the F1 cars are nowadays. And it's funny because with this car on it, I mean, this Ferrari looks orange. That Ferrari should be the same color. I know it's an Alfa Romeo, but I mean, come on, guys, am I right? But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this car. Well, actually, I've got one more thing. It's related to the wheels. Nowadays, of course, with the wheel nuts, I mean, you can get that thing on and off in like 1 second. You can get all 4 of them off in like 2 seconds, which is crazy. But back then, pit stops were not so easy. They did not change all 4 tires at every pit stop. They probably would go whole races on a single set of tires. But if they needed to change a tire, they would have to beat the ever-loving shit out of this wheel nut just to get one wheel off. And what's super cool about this car is you can actually take the wheels off. The wheel nuts spin and you can take the wheel off, and it gives you the brake dug. The axle looks, I feel like, kind of like exactly like how it would have looked back then. I mean, the detail, despite the fact that this car diecast could be from the 50s, I mean, the detail on this is really great for that. And of course, you can take the rear one off too, just in case you're into that. And this whole, I don't know what this is, the rear brake, I don't know if that was a thing back then, but that comes off too. But the wheel comes off, which is super cool. I didn't mention with the tires though, you might be able to see that the rubber on the tires are cracked. This car is super old and the rubber is beginning to like rot off of it. The rubber is the only thing that isn't metal on this car, and it's beginning to show its age. Also, it's got some funky rear suspension on this car, which I think is pretty awesome. And if you're like me and you just so happen to have 2 of these cars, you can create a terrible concoction. Since we've got basically a full F1 team in the 50s, I mean, the Alfa Romeo swept the podium on the first F1 race ever. They had 3 cars and they all finished on the podium. But I mean, we got 2 cars. We can devise a crazy plan to get the maximum performance out of our 1950s F1 team. So in order to get the maximum performance out of our little F1 team, we could send one of our drivers out on all big tires, and the other one we can set him out on all the little tires. And you know what's crazy about Grand Prix racing? You know, somebody did this. Maybe not in F1 times, probably way before F1, but you know somebody sent both of their cars out. One of them had really big tires and one of them had really little tires. And you know what? Both of those drivers probably died. But for everyone else on these guys' teams, you live and you learn. Quite literally, actually. And to this day, we still run big tires on the back and small tires on the front. Ah, racing. Don't you just love it? But everyone, that's all I have to say. Just a little fun trip down memory lane looking at one of the first F1 cars ever. Just a nice little side video every once in a while. I got a bunch of different cars I can make videos on that I never have. Maybe I should. It's going to be a long time before we see 2020 diecasts. So that's why I did this. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. And it seemed to be like a unanimous decision. So my next video will be the 2019 Charles Leclerc SF90. Got a lot of things to say about this car. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. We'll find out. But until then, guys, thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. This car has a whole chunk of the tire missing. That is why I showed this one and not that one, despite the fact that it has the windscreen. Whole chunk of tire gone. Catch you in the next video.